The man who used to be a billionaire lies curled up in the snow. The orange cat rushes to take action and surprises everyone. The wind howling off Lake Michigan was a physical entity, a predator stalking the frozen streets of the Chicago suburbs. It found every crack, every seam, driving snow crystals horizontally through the pre-dawn darkness. At the exposed bus stop on Sheridan Road, under the weak, flickering orange glow of a single street lamp, the wind tore relentlessly at the inadequate shelter provided by the plexiglass enclosure. Beneath the bench, huddled against the base, lay a man who had once commanded boardrooms and shaped skylines, now barely distinguishable from the discarded refuse blowing against the structure. His name was Richard Sterling, though the name itself felt like a relic from another life, another man entirely. Just 5 years ago, that name had been synonymous with innovation, wealth, and the meteoric rise of Sterling Solutions, a tech giant he had built from a garage startup into a global powerhouse. He had been the visionary, the charismatic CEO whose face graced magazine covers, whose pronouncements moved markets. He'd owned sprawling estates, private jets, a collection of vintage cars, and commanded the effortless respect that came with a 10-figure net worth. He'd had a wife, 2 grown children navigating their own privileged paths, a wide circle of influential friends, and a business partner, Dave Miller, who had been his closest confidant since college. Now, Richard Sterling was 61 years old, his face obscured by a matted, gray-streaked beard, his body lost within layers of ragged, foul-smelling clothing scavenged from donation bins and dumpsters. His home was this bus stop bench, or a doorway, or sometimes the relative warmth of an all-night laundromat if he wasn't chased out. His companions were the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, the biting cold that seeped into his bones, and the ghosts of his spectacular downfall. It had happened with shocking speed, a cascade of disasters he still struggled to fully comprehend through the fog of shame and cheap vodka. First came the unexpected market correction that hit the tech sector hard, exposing vulnerabilities in Sterling Solutions' aggressive expansion strategy. Then, the devastating discovery. Dave Miller, his trusted friend and partner, had been systematically embezzling millions for years, covering his tracks with complex financial maneuvers that implicated Richard himself. The ensuing scandal was brutal, public. The company collapsed into bankruptcy. Creditors circled like vultures, and investigations were launched. Though Richard was eventually cleared of criminal wrongdoing, his reputation was shattered, his fortune obliterated. The foundations of his life crumbled. His wife, appalled by the scandal and the loss of their lifestyle, filed for divorce, retreating to her family's old money on the East Coast. His children, caught up in their own lives and perhaps embarrassed by their father's public disgrace, offered sympathy but little tangible support, their visits becoming infrequent, then stopping altogether. Friends vanished. Calls went unreturned. The safety net he always assumed existed simply evaporated. Pride, perhaps, was his final enemy. Too ashamed to admit the totality of his ruin, too accustomed to being the one in control, Richard refused offers of modest help from former colleagues. He liquidated his few remaining personal assets, living first in hotels, then cheaper motels, then his car, until finally, even that was gone. He drifted, fueled by anger, bitterness, and increasing amounts of alcohol to numb the pain. He lost track of time, of place. He worked odd jobs under the table until his appearance became too off-putting. He learned the hard rhythms of survival on the streets, the constant search for food, warmth, a safe place to sleep, the crushing weight of invisibility, the casual cruelty and occasional, surprising kindness of strangers. Over 3 years, the billionaire visionary eroded, replaced by this anonymous figure huddled at a suburban bus stop. The sharp intellect was dulled by hardship and drink, the commanding presence shrunk by shame. All that remained was a profound, soul-deep exhaustion and a despair so complete it felt like a physical state. He had lost everything: fortune, family, friends, reputation, even, it felt, his own identity. Tonight, as the temperature plummeted towards single digits and the wind howled its mournful song, Richard Sterling felt the last vestiges of his will to survive begin to freeze. Like the tears that had long since stopped falling, he closed his eyes against the stinging snow, a ragged sigh escaping his cracked lips, and surrendered to the encroaching cold. The cold was absolute, a physical presence that squeezed the air from Richard's lungs and turned his blood to slush. The layers of clothing, damp from melted snow, offered no defense. Instead, they seemed to hold the chill closer to his skin. Shivering had consumed his remaining energy hours ago, replaced now by a dangerous numbness spreading from his fingers and toes inwards, a creeping paralysis that felt almost peaceful after the prolonged agony of the cold. His thoughts, sluggish and disjointed, drifted like snowflakes, fragments of memory, flashes of anger, waves of self-pity, all fading into a gray, indifferent fog. He was vaguely aware of the snow piling up on his chest, the wind scouring his exposed face, but it felt distant, happening to someone else. It was into this deepening stupor that a small, living warmth intruded. At first, Richard registered it only as a slight pressure, a subtle shift in the weight of snow on his chest. He lacked the energy or clarity to investigate. Perhaps it was just drifting snow, or his own body finally succumbing, playing tricks on his fading senses. But then came a faint vibration, a low, rumbling purr that somehow penetrated the thick layers of clothing and the fog in his brain. And with it, a distinct, kneading pressure, like tiny paws pushing rhythmically against his sternum. From the shadows beneath the bus stop bench, driven by its own desperate need for respite from the biting wind and lethal cold, a small orange tabby cat had emerged. This was Rusty, a tough little survivor who eked out an existence in this suburban periphery, navigating alleys, dumpsters, and the occasional handout from sympathetic residents. He knew this bus stop. Sometimes people left behind scraps of food, and the enclosure offered minimal protection from the elements. Tonight, however, offered no scraps, only the potentially fatal embrace of the blizzard. Rusty had likely been sheltering under the bench when Richard collapsed onto it earlier. Wary by nature, the cat had stayed hidden. But as the night wore on and the temperature dropped precipitously, instinct drove him to seek any possible source of warmth. The large, still figure on the bench, though smelling faintly of alcohol and neglect, radiated a minuscule amount of body heat, more than the frozen metal or snow-covered concrete. Cautiously, Rusty had crept out. He sniffed at Richard's boots, then slowly, hesitantly, leaped onto the man's snow-dusted legs, then onto his chest. Finding a slight dip between Richard's hunched shoulders and the collar of his ragged coat, Rusty curled into the tightest possible ball, pressing his small body against the larger form, trying to absorb and share the faint warmth. The purring was likely less contentment than a self-generated effort to stay warm, a common feline behavior in stressful situations. The kneading was pure instinct, a remnant of kittenhood, seeking comfort and perhaps trying to stimulate warmth from the unresponsive surface beneath him. To Richard, drifting on the edge of hypothermic unconsciousness, the cat's presence was a confusing, faint signal from a world he was rapidly leaving. He didn't connect it to memory or kindness. He barely registered it as real. Yet the slight weight, the improbable vibration of the purr against his ribs, the tiny insistence of the kneading paws, it was a spark, however minuscule, of life intruding upon his surrender to the cold. He couldn't process it, couldn't react, couldn't even truly feel the warmth Rusty so desperately sought and inadvertently shared. He was too far gone, slipping deeper into the metabolic shutdown that precedes death by freezing. Rusty, meanwhile, settled into his precarious refuge. He had found the best available shelter on a brutal night. He didn't know the man beneath him was dying. He didn't know he was a former billionaire. He only knew this large, still shape offered a fractional defense against the deadly cold. Curled on Richard Sterling's chest, the small orange cat purred fitfully, unwittingly sharing the last vestiges of warmth as the man's life force ebbed away into the freezing Chicago night. Time became meaningless, marked only by the relentless accumulation of snow and the steady drop in temperature. Richard Sterling lay utterly still, his breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible, his body temperature critically low. The small patch of warmth generated by Rusty's presence was entirely insufficient to counteract the overwhelming cold assaulting Richard's system. For Rusty, curled tightly on Richard's chest, the situation subtly changed. The faint heat he had sought began to dissipate. The almost non-existent rise and fall of the chest beneath him ceased its already minimal rhythm. The stillness became absolute, profound. To a creature attuned to the subtle signs of life, breath, warmth, slight movement, this change might have registered as deeply unsettling, perhaps even threatening. The refuge he had found was becoming as cold and inert as the frozen bench itself. Whether driven by fear, discomfort, or the sudden loss of the minimal warmth he'd found, Rusty became agitated. He lifted his head, let out a sharp, anxious meow into the swirling snow. Getting no response from the figure beneath him, he shifted position, kneading more urgently, then meowing again, louder this time, a distressed, questioning sound. Still nothing. Panic began to set in. Rusty leaped off Richard's chest onto the snow-covered bench, pacing back and forth, his tail twitching nervously. He let out a series of loud, insistent cries, the sound sharp against the howl of the wind. He darted to the edge of the shelter, peered out into the darkness, then back at the unmoving man, his meows becoming more frantic, almost screeching. He wasn't consciously sounding an alarm for Richard. He was reacting to the sudden, frightening change in his own immediate environment, his safe spot becoming disturbingly still and cold. It was just before 4 a.m. when the grinding gears and flashing yellow lights of a municipal sanitation truck cut through the pre-dawn gloom, making its slow progress down Sheridan Road. Behind the wheel was Maria Flores, a veteran sanitation worker who knew this route intimately, her shift starting in the dead of night regardless of the weather. The blizzard made driving treacherous and collection difficult, but the job had to be done. As she approached the bus stop, her headlights illuminated the snow-drifted enclosure. She noted the huddled figure on the bench, sadly not an uncommon sight, especially during harsh weather. She usually kept driving, respecting their space unless there was an obvious emergency, knowing the complexities of homelessness far outweighed her ability to help directly on her route. But tonight, something else caught her attention. The persistent, agitated cries of a cat, clearly emanating from the shelter. And then, a flash of orange darted out from the bench, ran in a frantic circle on the sidewalk, then darted back towards the figure, screeching loudly. Maria slowed the truck, peering intently through the snow-streaked windshield. That wasn't normal cat behavior, not even for a stray in a storm. That sounded like distress, real distress, and it seemed focused on the person on the bench who hadn't moved an inch despite the cat's frantic activity. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Pulling the truck carefully to the curb, leaving the flashing lights on, Maria grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight and cautiously approached the shelter, her boots crunching on the fresh snow. The orange cat, Rusty, saw her approach and darted back towards Richard, letting out another series of desperate meows before retreating slightly under the bench, watching her warily. Maria shone her light on the figure. He was almost completely covered in snow, only the rough shape of a human form visible beneath the white blanket. "Sir?" she called out, her voice sharp against the wind. "Sir, are you okay?" No response, no movement. Maria stepped closer, her unease turning to alarm. She reached out a gloved hand and brushed snow away from the man's face. His skin was deathly pale, lips blue, eyelids frozen partially shut with ice crystals. She couldn't see him breathing. Drawing on the first aid training required for city workers, she pressed 2 fingers against his neck, searching for a pulse. It was terrifyingly faint, thready, almost non-existent. His skin felt colder than the surrounding air. "Oh my God," she breathed, pulling out her radio immediately, her voice urgent but clear. "Dispatch, this is Flores, Sanitation Unit 3B. I need immediate EMS and police backup at the northbound bus shelter, Sheridan near Maplewood. Unresponsive male, probable severe hypothermia, possible cardiac arrest. He's buried in snow, barely breathing, pulse extremely weak. Requesting priority response." While relaying the information, she worked quickly, brushing as much snow off the man as possible, trying to shield his face from the wind with her own body. The orange cat watched from under the bench, silent now, large eyes reflecting the flashing lights of Maria's truck. Maria glanced at the cat. "You did good, kitty," she murmured. "You probably just saved his life." Whether the cat understood or not, its frantic distress, born of its own precarious situation, had served as the critical, unlikely alarm that brought help to Richard Sterling just as he slipped over the edge. The sirens, faint at first, grew rapidly louder, converging on the cold, lonely bus stop. The emergency room at Evanston Hospital was a controlled chaos of beeping machines, hushed urgency, and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Richard Sterling, admitted as a John Doe, was the epicenter of intense activity. Doctors and nurses worked rapidly to combat the severe hypothermia, employing warming blankets, heated IV fluids, and careful monitoring of his fragile vital signs. It was a long, slow battle to pull him back from the brink, his body temperature dangerously low, his system profoundly stressed by prolonged exposure and likely compromised by malnutrition and alcohol abuse. For days, Richard remained in critical condition, drifting in and out of consciousness, plagued by disjointed nightmares that blended the icy bus stop with fragments of boardroom battles and family dinners long past. When he was lucid, he was confused, disoriented, unable to provide coherent information about himself. A hospital social worker, Sarah Chen, was assigned his case, tasked with the difficult job of identifying him and assessing his needs beyond immediate medical care. Meanwhile, Rusty the cat had his own small drama unfolding. Maria Flores, concerned for the creature who had inadvertently saved the man, had managed to coax the cold, hungry cat into a cardboard box and dropped him off at the local animal shelter on her way back to the depot. Scanned for a microchip, Rusty came up blank. He was just another stray, albeit one with a potentially remarkable story, now facing an uncertain future in an overcrowded shelter system. Back at the hospital, Sarah Chen began piecing together clues. Richard's fingerprints eventually yielded a match in a database, linked not to a criminal record, but to background checks from his former corporate life. The name, Richard Sterling, unlocked a cascade of information. The former tech titan, the bankruptcy, the scandal. The contrast between the man on the cover of Fortune magazine from 6 years ago and the destitute patient in the ICU was staggering, heartbreaking. As Richard slowly stabilized, moved from the ICU to a regular room, his mind began to clear, though shrouded in weakness and a profound, crushing shame now that his anonymity was gone. He spoke little, answering Sarah's gentle questions with curt, evasive responses. But sometimes, in moments of delirium or quiet reflection, he murmured things, fragments about algorithms, about betrayal, about a promise broken, and once, almost incoherently, he spoke about finding a half-frozen kitten in a dumpster behind his first office building years ago, nursing it back to health in secret before finding it a home with his secretary. "Just a little orange thing," he'd mumbled. "Fought like hell to live." Sarah documented everything meticulously. The mention of the orange cat struck her. She cross-referenced the date and location of Richard's rescue with animal shelter intakes. There it was, an adult male orange tabby brought in by a sanitation worker from the same location, same morning. Coincidence? Perhaps. But combined with Richard's fragmented memory, it felt significant. Around the same time, a former mid-level employee of Sterling Solutions, Mark Evans, someone Richard had personally mentored years ago, encouraging him to finish his degree, saw a small human interest piece Maria Flores had shared with a local community blog about the rescue at the bus stop, highlighting the cat's role. The description of the unresponsive man didn't immediately click, but later, Mark saw a brief news report about the identification of the formerly homeless man as Richard Sterling. Mark was stunned, saddened by his former mentor's fall. Then he remembered the cat story from the blog. And he remembered Richard Sterling, during a company charity drive years ago, telling a self-deprecating story about rescuing a starving orange kitten from a dumpster in his early days. Putting it all together, Mark felt compelled to act. He wrote a heartfelt post on a professional networking site, sharing the public news of Richard's situation, recalling Richard's past mentorship, and highlighting the incredible irony. The man who gave him a second chance by encouraging his education was now potentially saved by a creature echoing one he himself had given a second chance years ago. He ended with a simple plea. Success is fleeting. Fortunes change, but kindness echoes. Let's show Richard Sterling the compassion he once showed others. Mark's post, shared among former Sterling Solutions employees and the wider Chicago tech community, didn't magically solve Richard's problems, but it generated a wave of quiet support. Offers of legal assistance, connections to social services beyond the hospital basics, even tentative inquiries from his estranged children began to filter through to Sarah Chen. More tangibly, donations flowed into a fund set up by Mark to help with Richard's long-term recovery needs, and specifically to ensure the orange cat from the bus stop, Rusty, could be retrieved from the shelter and cared for. Richard learned about all this slowly, relayed gently by Sarah. He was overwhelmed, humbled, deeply ashamed, yet also profoundly moved. The knowledge that the cat at the bus stop might somehow be cosmically linked to his long-ago act of kindness, and that this connection had now potentially saved his life and sparked renewed human connection, was almost too much to bear. He wept, for the first time in years, not from despair, but from a complex brew of regret, gratitude, and the terrifying, fragile flicker of hope. Recovery would be a monumental task, physically, mentally, emotionally. Rebuilding trust, addressing potential addiction issues, navigating complex family dynamics, finding stable housing and a reason to keep going, it was a mountain far steeper than any he'd climbed in the corporate world. But as he lay in the sterile hospital bed, the prospect of a future, however uncertain, existed where only bleak finality loomed before. And central to that fragile hope was the image of a small orange cat. Sarah assured him Rusty was safe at the shelter, waiting. The first crucial step on Richard's long road back would be reclaiming the small creature whose own desperate need for warmth had, against all odds, offered him a second chance at life. The billionaire was gone, perhaps forever. But Richard Sterling, the man, had been given one more, improbable opportunity to find his way home. The irony wasn't lost on Richard. The anonymous warmth sought by a stray cat on a freezing night had ultimately pierced the icy isolation he had wrapped around himself for 3 years. In the quiet weeks of physical recovery that followed, under Sarah Chen's steady guidance, that irony slowly began to transform into fragile motivation. He started engaging more earnestly with the physical therapists, pushing through the pain and weakness left by the severe hypothermia. He listened, truly listened, as Sarah outlined options for transitional housing and support programs, his old pride gradually yielding to the humbling reality that accepting help was now his only path forward. The thought of Rusty, waiting at the shelter, became a focal point. This small creature, a living echo of a long-forgotten act of basic decency from his past life, represented something tangible to hold on to amidst the wreckage. Sarah confirmed that Mark Evans' fund had ensured Rusty received a full vet check and was being held safely. Richard's first concrete goal, the first positive action he felt capable of planning, was bringing Rusty home, wherever home was going to be. Finally, the day came. Discharged from the hospital to a modest but clean room in a supportive housing facility Sarah had arranged, Richard felt shaky but resolute. His first outing, accompanied by Sarah, was to the animal shelter. Seeing Rusty again, this time through the wire of a kennel door rather than buried in snow on his own chest, felt surreal. The cat looked healthier, cleaner, but still possessed that wary survivor's air. Richard spoke his name softly. Rusty blinked amber eyes, perhaps recognizing the voice, perhaps simply reacting to a gentle tone. When the attendant opened the kennel, Richard knelt slowly, extending a tentative hand. Rusty hesitated only a moment before rubbing his head against Richard's fingers, purring that familiar rough rumble. It was enough. This was the start. Carrying the small cat carrier felt like holding the first fragile piece of a life he might, just might, be able to rebuild. Back in the small, sparsely furnished room at the supportive housing facility, Richard placed the carrier gently on the floor and opened the door. Rusty peered out cautiously, sniffing the unfamiliar air. Clean, quiet, tinged faintly with the scent of institutional paint and donated furniture. After a long moment, he stepped out, tail low but not tucked, and began a slow, methodical exploration of his new, limited territory. He sniffed the legs of the simple bed frame, the worn armchair, the closed door, his whiskers twitching, mapping this new space. Richard watched him, feeling a mix of apprehension and a strange, protective tenderness. This room was a universe away from the penthouses and boardrooms he once inhabited, yet sharing it with this small creature felt more real, more substantial than much of what had come before. He filled the simple ceramic bowls Sarah Chen had provided with fresh water and a small portion of the food Mark Evans' fund had supplied. He set up the litter box in a discreet corner. These small acts of care felt purposeful in a way multi-million-dollar deals no longer did. They were simple, direct, meeting a fundamental need. Rusty, having completed his initial patrol, approached the food bowl and began to eat, his wariness momentarily overcome by hunger. Richard sat quietly in the armchair, not wanting to crowd him, just observing. He reflected on the nature of this sudden, profound connection. The relationships in his former life, with business partners, associates even, sadly with his own family towards the end, had become largely transactional, built on foundations of wealth, status, and expectation. When those foundations crumbled, so did the connections. Dave Miller's betrayal was the ultimate expression of that conditional loyalty. But this small cat, Rusty asked for nothing but the basics: food, water, warmth, a safe space. He didn't care about Richard Sterling's former billions or his current destitution. He didn't judge the ragged clothes or the haunted look that still lingered in Richard's eyes. Rusty had sought warmth on a freezing night, and later seemed to accept the hand that offered food and shelter. Now, finishing his meal, he looked over at Richard, blinked slowly, and began to meticulously groom his paws, a small domestic ritual bringing an unexpected sense of peace to the sterile room. Over the next few days, a quiet routine emerged. Richard focused on his own recovery steps, attending mandatory counseling sessions, reconnecting tentatively with Sarah Chen about long-term plans, trying to eat properly. But interwoven with this was the constant grounding presence of Rusty. The cat seemed to understand the boundaries of the small room quickly, finding favorite spots, a patch of weak sunlight by the window, the foot of the bed at night. He began to seek out Richard's presence more actively, rubbing against his legs with a rumbling purr, sometimes leaping silently onto the armchair to curl up beside him, while Richard read pamphlets about job training programs that felt worlds away. Richard found himself talking to the cat, murmuring observations about the weather or frustrations with paperwork, needing no response but finding comfort in voicing thoughts aloud to a living being who simply listened, occasionally flicking an ear or offering a soft meow. He learned the specific cadence of Rusty's purr that signified deep contentment, the way his tail gave a slight flick just before he settled down. This was a relationship devoid of pretense, of expectation, of the complex baggage that had freighted his human interactions. It was simply presence, acceptance, a shared, quiet space. It wasn't the effusive affection of a pampered pet, perhaps, but a subtle, resilient bond forged between two survivors. Richard realized, with a clarity that cut through years of cynicism, that this unconditional regard, this simple loyalty offered freely by an animal he had once rescued and who had inadvertently rescued him in turn, was perhaps the purest form of love he had experienced in a very long time. It was a lifeline, pulling him gently, persistently, towards the shore of his own humanity.
The old woman kept cursing her late daughter's cat until the day he dragged something into the house that made her collapse in tears. Why does a grieving widow's beloved orange cat constantly bring worthless trash home, driving her to despair? His strange habit seems senseless until a fall, a helpful nudge with a walking stick, and a neighbor's bag of collected junk reveal the shocking, hidden truth about the cat's connection to her deceased daughter and a promise made years ago. Subscribe, like, and listen to this deeply moving story of memory, love, and incredible feline loyalty. The silence in the old clapboard house on Elm Street wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, stagnant, thick with unspoken grief. Evelyn Hayes moved through the rooms like a ghost herself, a woman in her late 60s whose world had shrunk to these four walls since her daughter Lily had succumbed to a fierce, relentless illness 3 years prior. The vibrant colors Lily had loved, the bright paintings she'd created, the cheerful curtains she'd sewn, seemed muted now, coated in the dust of Evelyn's apathy. Dishes sometimes sat in the sink longer than they should have, the mail piled up occasionally unopened, and the garden Lily had adored showed patches of neglect. Evelyn existed, breathing in and out, but the spark within her had been cruelly extinguished. Her sole companion was Leo, a large marmalade orange tabby cat with knowing green eyes. He had come into her life during Lily's final months, adopted by Lily herself from the local shelter during a brief, hopeful period between chemo rounds. Lily, frail but determined, had insisted. "He needs a home, Mom," she'd said, stroking the cat's surprisingly soft fur. "And maybe we need him." After Lily was gone, Leo remained, a furry, living link to the daughter Evelyn missed with every fiber of her being. But Leo had developed a habit that drove Evelyn to distraction, grating on her already frayed nerves. He brought things home, not mice or birds like a normal cat, but junk. Every day, almost without fail, Leo would appear through the cat flap or trot proudly in the back door carrying some new, useless treasure. A crumpled candy wrapper, a bottle cap, a dried brittle leaf, a scrap of faded blue fabric snagged from somewhere, once even a single, muddy gardening glove. He would deposit these offerings, usually in the center of the kitchen floor or on the living room rug, sometimes letting out a soft, muffled meow as if announcing his contribution. Evelyn couldn't stand it. Her house, already feeling cluttered with memories she couldn't bear to face, was becoming a repository for actual trash. "Leo, stop it!" she'd snap, her voice sharper than she intended, startling the cat. "What is wrong with you? This isn't a landfill. Look at this mess." She'd scoop up the offending item, the empty beer can likely snagged from a neighbor's recycling bin, the twist of wire, the small smooth stone, and toss it angrily into the trash, ignoring the confused or perhaps reproachful look in Leo's green eyes. Her grief manifested as a tightly controlled numbness most days, but Leo's baffling habit chipped away at her composure, triggering bursts of frustrated anger. It felt like a deliberate annoyance, a small, constant disruption in the fragile quiet she clung to. Why couldn't he just be a normal cat? Why did he insist on turning her home, her sanctuary of sorrow, into a midden heap? She loved him fiercely because he was Lily's legacy. But his relentless collecting felt like a bizarre, unwelcome intrusion on her carefully managed misery. She provided his food, cleaned his litter box, offered absent-minded strokes when he brushed against her legs, but their coexistence felt strained, punctuated by her exasperation at his inexplicable hoarding. He was a constant reminder of Lily, yes, but also a daily source of irritation, another small weight added to the crushing burden of her loss. Some days, the silence in the house pressed down on Evelyn so hard she felt she couldn't breathe. On those days, she'd wander into Lily's old bedroom, untouched since the day they brought her home from the hospice for the last time. Everything was as Lily had left it. The vibrant paintings leaning against the walls, the shelf of worn paperbacks, the faded quilt on the bed. Evelyn would sit on the edge of the mattress, running her hand over the soft fabric, trying desperately to conjure Lily's presence, her laugh, the specific way she tilted her head when she was thinking. But the memories were sharp-edged things, bringing as much pain as comfort. Sometimes she thought she caught Lily's faint scent, a mix of lavender soap and the sharp tang of turpentine from her paints, but it was fleeting, elusive, like trying to hold smoke. Leo often followed her into the room, hopping onto the bed to sit beside her, purring softly. Did he remember Lily? He had only been with them for those last few intense, emotionally charged months. Lily had doted on him, finding comfort in his solid, warm presence during the long, draining hours of her illness. She'd cradle him while reading, talk to him about her fears and hopes, her voice weak but filled with affection. "You're my good luck charm, Leo," she'd whisper into his fur, "my sunshine cat." Evelyn remembered Lily burying her face in his orange fur after a particularly difficult chemo session, Leo remaining perfectly still, absorbing her silent tears. Yes, Evelyn thought, he must remember. These shared memories made Leo's current behavior even more baffling and frustrating. Later that day, Evelyn would find a new piece of trash on the rug. This time, a small rusted metal buckle. She sighed, exasperated. "Where do you even find this stuff, Leo?" she demanded, picking it up with distaste. Leo just blinked at her from his perch on the windowsill, offering no explanation. Her neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a kind retired postal worker who lived 2 doors down, sometimes saw Leo on his travels. George Henderson was a widower himself and worried quietly about Evelyn. He'd seen how she'd withdrawn after Lily's death, how the once immaculate garden now showed signs of neglect. He also noticed the orange cat's odd habit. "Saw your cat carrying an old plastic bottle near the creek path this morning, Evelyn," he remarked one afternoon as he retrieved his newspaper from the curb while Evelyn was half-heartedly weeding near her mailbox. "Funny thing, he always seems to be carrying something. Got himself a little collection going?" Evelyn just flushed, slightly embarrassed. "He drives me crazy with that junk, George. I don't know why he does it." "Well, cats are mysteries," George chuckled, though his eyes held concern as he took in her tired posture. "Just checking in. Let me know if you need anything. Here?" "I'm fine, George. Thank you," Evelyn replied automatically, turning back to her weeding, effectively ending the conversation. She appreciated his kindness, but wasn't ready to accept help or pity. Later, finding a dirty, frayed piece of rope deposited by the back door, Evelyn felt a fresh surge of irritation. It wasn't just the mess. It felt like a deliberate mocking of her attempts to maintain order in her crumbling world. Didn't the cat understand anything? Didn't he sense her fragility, her need for peace? She snatched up the rope and threw it forcefully into the outside bin, slamming the lid shut. Leo, who had been watching from the porch railing, flinched and darted away. Evelyn immediately felt a pang of remorse for her harshness, but was too overwhelmed by her own swirling emotions, grief, frustration, loneliness, to call him back or soften her stance. The weight of Lily's absence felt heavier than ever, and Leo's strange, persistent collecting felt less like a quirk and more like another crack forming in the fragile facade of her control. The rain started just before dusk, a cold, persistent drizzle that blurred the edges of the world outside Evelyn's kitchen window. She was rinsing dishes, lost in a familiar fog of memory, when her foot slipped on a patch of water near the sink. Perhaps condensation, perhaps water splashed from the faucet. Her balance, never perfect these days, deserted her completely. With a startled cry, she went down hard, landing awkwardly on her right hip. A sharp, searing pain shot through her, stealing her breath. She lay on the cool linoleum floor, stunned, gasping. She tried to push herself up, but the pain in her hip was agonizing, immobilizing. Panic began to set in. She was alone. The phone was on the wall mount across the room, impossibly far away. Her cell phone was upstairs on her nightstand. Nobody was expecting her. Nobody would know anything was wrong. "Help," she whispered, the word barely audible even to herself. Tears of pain and fear welled in her eyes. She felt utterly helpless, trapped on her own kitchen floor. Leo appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise of her fall and her cry. He approached cautiously, meowing softly, his green eyes wide with concern. He nudged her hand with his head, then licked her cheek, his rough tongue strangely comforting. But she couldn't move, couldn't respond beyond a shaky, "Good boy, Leo." Seeing her lack of response, Leo seemed to grow agitated. He paced back and forth beside her, letting out anxious meows. Then, abruptly, he turned and trotted out of the kitchen toward the hallway. Evelyn watched him go, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. Even the cat was abandoning her. But moments later, she heard a faint scratching, bumping sound from the hallway. Leo reappeared in the kitchen doorway, and he wasn't alone. He was nudging, pawing at, and somehow managing to propel something along the floor towards her, her old walking stick. It was a simple wooden cane with a curved handle, something Dr. Evans had prescribed years ago after a bout of sciatica. Evelyn hadn't used it in ages. She hated it, hated how it symbolized her aging, her increasing frailty, things she desperately wanted to deny, especially after losing Lily, which had made her feel ancient overnight. She kept it tucked away in the back corner of the hall closet, out of sight and out of mind. Yet somehow, Leo had located it. Now, with intense concentration, he was persistently nudging the base of the stick with his nose and batting at it with his paws, managing to slide it awkwardly across the linoleum towards where Evelyn lay. He wasn't strong enough to lift it or drag it effectively, but his focused effort, accompanied by insistent meows directed alternately at the stick and at Evelyn, was unmistakable. He wanted her to see it, to reach it. Evelyn started, astonished. How did he even know? Could he possibly understand its purpose? It seemed impossible, yet there it was. The stick was now only a couple of feet away from her outstretched hand. Hope flickered through her panic. With a surge of adrenaline fueled by Leo's insistent cries and nudges, Evelyn stretched, ignoring the sharp pain in her hip. Her fingers brushed the smooth wood. She strained, grasped the curved handle, and pulled it towards her. Using the walking stick as a lever, bracing it against the sturdy leg of the kitchen table, Evelyn managed, through gritted teeth and waves of pain, to slowly, agonizingly haul herself into a sitting position, then eventually to her knees. From there, she could reach the counter and pull herself, shaky and trembling, to her feet. She leaned heavily against the counter, breathing hard, relief washing over her in dizzying waves. She looked down at Leo, who was now sitting calmly beside the discarded stick, looking up at her expectantly, letting out a soft purr. "Leo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Leo, you brought me the stick." She reached down a trembling hand and stroked his head. "How did you know, you clever, clever boy?" In that moment, her annoyance at his trash-collecting habit felt petty, insignificant. This creature, this furry remnant of her daughter's love, had just done something extraordinary. He hadn't just brought trash, he had brought help. He had understood her distress and responded in the only way he could, using his feline ingenuity to bridge the gap of her helplessness. A profound shift occurred within Evelyn. Looking into Leo's steady green eyes, she saw not an annoying scavenger, but a loyal, intelligent companion whose actions she had completely, utterly misunderstood. Evelyn spent the next day recovering on the sofa, her hip throbbing painfully, but thankfully not broken, just badly bruised according to the doctor she'd managed to call after her fall. Leo stayed close beside her, a furry orange presence radiating quiet concern. He didn't bring any trash into the house that day, instead contenting himself with napping on the cushion next to her or occasionally reaching out a soft paw to touch her arm. Evelyn felt a deep sense of gratitude and a growing shame for her past impatience with him. She stroked his fur, murmuring apologies and thanks, feeling the steady rumble of his purr as a comforting reassurance. Late that afternoon, there was a knock at the front door. Evelyn used the walking stick, now kept readily accessible, to make her way slowly to answer it. It was Mr. Henderson, looking slightly awkward, holding a plastic grocery bag that seemed to contain an odd assortment of objects. "Evelyn," he began hesitantly, "hope I'm not disturbing you. Just wanted to check in, haven't seen you out much. And well, there's this." He gestured with the bag. "Come in, George," Evelyn said, stepping back carefully. "I had a bit of a fall yesterday, just taking it easy today." "Oh dear, are you all right?" Concern flooded Mr. Henderson's face. "I'll be fine. Bruised my hip, but nothing broken, thank heavens. Leo actually helped me," she added, a note of wonder still in her voice as she glanced towards the living room where the cat now watched them from the armchair. Mr. Henderson looked surprised. "Leo? Well, that's something. He's usually so standoffish." He paused, then held up the bag again. "Speaking of Leo, this is a bit strange, Evelyn, but I've been seeing him carrying things around for weeks now. Not just leaves and wrappers, but, well, bits and pieces. He seems to favor certain spots. Back behind your old shed, under that lilac bush where Lily used to have her swing set, sometimes near the recycling bins on pickup day. I got worried he was making a mess or attracting pests. So when I saw him drop a few things this morning while I was out walking, I gathered them up. Thought maybe you should see, in case any of it means anything." He sounded apologetic, clearly unsure if he was interfering or being helpful. Evelyn felt a prickle of her old annoyance, more trash, but tempered it with curiosity and her newfound appreciation for Leo. "It's all right, George. He does have that odd habit. Let's see what treasures he's found now." Mr. Henderson carefully upended the bag onto the coffee table. Out tumbled a collection of seemingly random objects, dusty and slightly weathered. A couple of smooth gray river stones, a brightly colored plastic bottle cap, a dried maple leaf, a tangle of blue yarn, typical Leo fare. But then Evelyn's breath caught. Mixed in with the debris were other instantly recognizable items. There was the small porcelain head of a doll, one eye cracked, the painted smile faded. It belonged to Rosie, Lily's favorite childhood doll, relegated to a box in the shed years ago. Beside it lay a small faded Polaroid photograph, curled at the edges. Evelyn picked it up with trembling fingers. It showed a much younger Lily, maybe 5 or 6, grinning, gap-toothed, proudly holding up a messy finger painting, standing right beside the lilac bush in the backyard. Evelyn hadn't seen that photo in years. And then, beneath the photo, lay the object that made Evelyn's heart stop altogether. It was a crumpled, slightly grubby plastic hospital wristband. Smoothing it out, she could clearly read the printed name, Lillian Hayes, and the date, from Lily's final hospital stay just before she came home for the last time. Evelyn stared at the items spread before her. The doll's head, the faded photo, the hospital band, fragments of her daughter's life, gathered from the places Lily had loved or frequented, collected by the cat Lily had adopted. The trash Leo had been bringing home wasn't trash at all. It was memories, pieces of Lily. The room seemed to swim around her. She sank onto the sofa, the objects clutched tightly in her hand, a wave of emotion so powerful it stole her breath. Grief, shock, astonishment, and an overwhelming, heartbreaking understanding washing over her. Mr. Henderson watched her, his initial awkwardness replaced by stunned silence as he saw the profound impact these seemingly random bits of junk were having. The carefully constructed dam around Evelyn's grief finally broke. A sob tore through her, raw and ragged, followed by another and another. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the image of the faded photograph in her hand. She wasn't just crying for the pain of her fall or the shock of recognition, but for the years of suppressed sorrow, the aching void Lily had left, and the staggering revelation settling upon her. Mr. Henderson shifted uncomfortably, alarmed by her sudden, intense display of emotion. "Evelyn, are those things important?" he asked gently, completely bewildered. He had expected annoyance, perhaps mild curiosity, not this devastating outpouring. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak for a moment, clutching the hospital band, the doll's head, the photo as if they were anchors in a storm. Leo, sensing her extreme distress, jumped down from the armchair and came to her side, pressing against her leg, purring loudly, a comforting weight against her sorrow. Evelyn automatically reached down to stroke him, her tears dripping onto his soft orange fur. Finally, she looked up at Mr. Henderson, her eyes red-rimmed but filled with a dawning, tearful clarity. "Important?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "George, they're pieces of Lily." She held up the hospital band. This was from her last stay, before... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Then the rest of the story tumbled out, words choked by sobs but driven by the need to finally share the weight she had carried alone for so long. "I've never told anyone this, George," she began, taking a shaky breath, stroking Leo, who remained steadfastly by her side. "This cat, Leo, he wasn't just a shelter cat I picked up after Lily died. Lily picked him out herself. It was during one of her last rounds of chemotherapy." She described the bleak hospital setting, Lily's frailness, her sudden insistence on visiting the nearby animal shelter during a precious day pass. She recounted Lily's immediate connection with the quiet, slightly wary orange cat in the corner cage. "She held him," Evelyn whispered, closing her eyes briefly, lost in the memory. "And she looked at me, so weak but so certain, and she said, 'Mom, if I don't make it, you'll be lonely.' I tried to shush her, told her not to talk like that, but she just held Leo tighter and said, 'No, listen, if I die, Leo will stay with you. Promise me you'll keep him. He'll stay by your side, and he'll keep everything safe for you. All the little things. He'll remember.'" Evelyn opened her eyes, looking from the objects on the table to the cat now purring against her knee. I thought it was just the illness talking, the medication maybe. A sweet, rambling thought, keep everything for you. What did that even mean? But now, her voice broke again. All this time, the places he goes, the shed where her old toys were stored, the yard where she played, even near the bins where I must have thrown out things from the hospital. He wasn't bringing trash, George. He was drawn to her scent, maybe, to her places, and he was bringing me pieces of her. He was keeping his promise. The full weight of it settled over her, the cat's loyalty transcending understanding, his actions not annoying habits, but unwitting acts of remembrance, fulfilling a dying girl's loving prophecy. The annoyance she had felt for months curdled into deep shame, replaced by overwhelming love and gratitude. Leo hadn't been driving her crazy. He had been tending the fragments of her shattered heart in the only way he knew how. Mr. Henderson listened, utterly speechless, tears welling in his own eyes. The story of the vicious stray cat was entirely reframed. This wasn't just an animal. This was a furry guardian, a keeper of memories, bound by a promise made to a girl facing death. That afternoon marked a profound turning point for Evelyn. The revelation didn't erase her grief, but it reshaped it. It cracked open the numbness, allowing not just sorrow, but also warmth, connection, and a path towards healing to filter in. She no longer saw Leo's offerings as trash, but as treasures, poignant reminders collected by Lily's devoted messenger. She gathered them carefully, placing them in a special memory box alongside the walking stick Leo had brought her. Her relationship with Leo transformed into one of deep, mutual devotion, understanding, and shared remembrance. And her connection with her neighbor, forged through shared tears and the revelation of a secret promise, opened the door to letting others back into her carefully guarded world. The orange cat, the collector of sorrows, had not only saved her physically, but had opened the way for her heart to begin, finally, to heal. Okay, here are approximately 500 additional words to extend the ending of the story about Evelyn, Lily, and Leo, focusing on the period after the revelation. The conversation with George Henderson left Evelyn feeling raw, but strangely lighter, as if a pressure valve deep inside her had finally been released after he left, offering quiet words of support and promising to look in on her regularly. Evelyn sat on the floor beside the coffee table for a long time, Leo pressed firmly against her side, his purr a steady anchor. She gently touched each item Mr. Henderson had brought, the doll's cracked face, the vibrant colors dimmed in the old photograph, the stark finality of the hospital band. They weren't just objects. They were echoes, whispers from Lily. And Leo, her daughter's quirky, furry legacy, had been faithfully gathering these echoes, guarding them in his own way. With newfound reverence, Evelyn found an old silk-lined box that had once held handkerchiefs. She carefully placed the doll's head, the photo, the hospital band, and the other small, previously dismissed items Leo had brought inside. The rusted buckle, the frayed rope, the smooth river stones. She added the walking stick to the back of the hall closet, no longer seeing it as a symbol of her own decline, but as a tool brought by love. This memory box wasn't meant to be hidden away like her grief had been, but kept close, a tangible connection facilitated by the most unlikely messenger. Their dynamic shifted profoundly. When Leo brought home a new offering a few days later, a single, perfect blue jay feather, Evelyn didn't scold him. She knelt down, thanked him softly, and gently stroked his head. "Another treasure, Leo? For Lily?" she murmured. Leo blinked slowly, dropping the feather at her feet before rubbing against her legs. Evelyn picked it up and added it to the box. His collecting habit didn't stop entirely, but her reaction transformed from anger to quiet acceptance, even a poignant curiosity about what fragment of the outside world, perhaps touched by Lily's lingering presence, he would bring next. Leo, in turn, seemed to sense the shift in her. He became less of a shadow and more of a constant, visible companion. He sought her lap more often, kneading gently before settling down. He followed her from room to room, not just at heel, but sometimes walking ahead, pausing to look back, as if ensuring she was still coming. He still had his independent streak, but the wary defensiveness around her evaporated, replaced by an open, trusting affection that warmed the cold corners of Evelyn's heart. True to his word, George Henderson became a regular, welcome presence. He'd stop by on his walks, sometimes just for a quick chat over the fence, other times accepting Evelyn's hesitant offer of coffee on the porch. He never pried, but he listened patiently when Evelyn felt able to share a memory of Lily, sometimes offering a quiet reminiscence of his own late wife. Their shared experience of loss, brought into focus by Leo's story, forged a gentle, supportive friendship that eased both their solitudes. George always brought a small treat for Leo, acknowledging the cat's special status with a respectful nod. Slowly, tentatively, Evelyn began to re-engage with the world beyond her grief. Inspired by the photograph Leo had unearthed, she started spending time in the backyard again, not just pulling weeds absent-mindedly, but truly tending the garden Lily had loved, planting bright zinnias and sunflowers. She even hung one of Lily's vibrant abstract paintings in the living room, its bold colors a stark contrast to the muted tones her life had taken on. It felt like honoring Lily, not just mourning her. The neighbors noticed the changes. The brighter garden, Evelyn lingering outside to chat with George, the sight of the once vicious orange cat lounging peacefully on the porch railing near Evelyn's chair. The story, shared discreetly by George, circulated with quiet awe. Leo was no longer just the stray cat. He was Lily's cat, the keeper of memories, the unlikely hero. Sometimes, small offerings appeared on Evelyn's porch. A high-quality can of cat food, a new feather toy, left anonymously by those touched by the tale. One crisp autumn evening, Evelyn sat on the porch swing, a quilt over her lap, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery orange hues that reminded her, as so many things now did, of Leo. He was curled beside her on the swing, a warm, solid presence. She held the memory box on her lap, occasionally tracing the outline of the items within. The pain of Lily's absence was still there, a permanent scar, but it no longer consumed her. It was interwoven now with gratitude for Leo, for Mr. Henderson's kindness, and for the unexpected ways love endures and reveals itself. Leo shifted, resting his head on her knee, purring deeply. Evelyn smiled, stroking his soft fur. "You stayed," she whispered, echoing Lily's words. "You stayed, and you kept everything for me. Thank you, my sunshine cat." The silence that settled around them now was not empty, but full of peace, acceptance, and the enduring warmth of a promise kept.